All right, hello, my name is Mia Abate. I am a second-year student here at Emla College, and today we will be rethinking royalty. So to start, we'll play a little mind game. So what are the first three words that come to mind when you hear this word? King. And if you thought of words such as power, male, royalty, man, crown, monarchy, and then you answered, like most other people who took part of my survey, which I will get to in a couple slides here. How about the word queen? And if you answered with words such as power, England, woman, crown, female, old, then again you answered like most people. Even if you said band or Freddie Mercury, then you aren't alone, as other people have said that too. So this led me to a question of what makes a king and what makes a queen. And while doing research, it crossed my mind that there have been many female rulers who have ruled their countries in their own right. And upon digging deeper, I found that a lot of these female rulers were female kings. But a lot of these female kings are under-researched and widely unknown. So, for my research to back up my findings, the theories I used were queer theory and gender performity. And queer anthropology, or queer theory, is getting rid of heteronormative bias in research, study, and just anything. So instead of just thinking strictly male and female, it's looking at all perspectives of every person in a society. And gender performity is how we speak, how we dress, how we act to conform to our preconceived notions of gender. For example, the figures on the bottom here are figures we see almost every day in our daily lives, and we have no reason to believe that they have any gender except the one on the right as a triangle over the torso. Therefore, we associate that with a skirt, therefore associating that with being female, therefore that is the female bathroom. Same with the image up on top. One figure is thinking about football, the other is thinking about shopping. And if you were from an alien planet that had no preconceived notions of gender in our society, then you would probably be very confused. But as it is, because gender performity teaches us that guys should like football and girls should like materialistic things like shopping, therefore that's the men's restroom and that's the women's restroom. And so I conducted some of my own research through Qualtrics on a survey, a 14-question survey, where I asked questions about basic demographics such as age, preferred gender, etc. But some of my main questions come from comparing people's religious practices to women's roles and women in power. And I should note that this is still ongoing research. This is just the current data I pulled from the current amount of surveys I have, which is about 77. And so the first question here is, do you believe that women have certain roles they need to adhere to? And as you can see, most people answered no. And the people who answered yes and sometimes responded with, the typical response was with motherhood, and that's a role that only women can take on. And the second one here is, do you believe a female or anyone of a third gender can be king? And again, most people answered yes, about 67%. I'm sorry, most people, then the people who answered no, and sometimes, again, their responses were kind of the same thing, and also there were some people saying they don't believe in a third gender, therefore they can't be king. And the last one, do you believe that those who identify as a woman or a third gender should be able to hold a position of power? And again, the majority of people answered yes, and the no and sometimes answers are essentially the same. So, coming back to the question, can a woman be king? First, we should go over some basic definitions, because as Americans, I'm sure that we are not as familiar with the monarchy. So, as dictionary.com defines, a king is a male sovereign or monarch, a man who holds by life tenure and usually by heredity right the chief authority over a country and people, which this is probably the definition we are all familiar with, as a king should be a man. Then a queen regent is a queen who reigns in behalf of another. So think of a queen ruling in place of her son as her son grows up. And then lastly, a queen regent is a queen who reigns in her own right. So a queen who in theory has the same amount of power as a king. So now this leads me to the 3 basic research questions I had that guided me through my research. The first being, what does it mean to be a king? What gives a king his power or their power, and how do they come to that power? Secondly, why are some women in history remembered as kings and others are not? And why does history forget about these people? Because like I said before, they are widely under-researched and not unknown. And lastly, what does all this say about our modern views on gender? Because there's no doubt that our modern views on gender are very strict and do not allow for much fluidity. So to answer these questions, I researched the lives and reign of 9 separate female rulers who at one point in their life ruled their country in their own right. And the ones with stars next to their names are ones that have been recorded in their culture's language and culture's history as legitimate kings. So first we have Kubaba of Sumer, who ruled somewhere between 2500 to 2330 BCE. The exact dates are unknown because the Sumer king list said she ruled for over 100 years, which we know is probably not true. And then we have Hatshepsut of Egypt, who ruled from 1479 to 1458 BCE. Wu Zetian of China, who ruled from 690 to 705. Tamar of Georgia from 1184 to 1213. And Razia of India from 1236 to 1240. And we have Elizabeth I of England from 1558 to 1603. Christina of Sweden from 1632 to 1654, Dodi Akabi of the Ga people from 1642 to 1648, and lastly, Catherine II, or Catherine the Great of Russia from 1762 to 1796. And as you may have noticed, the only 2 that have not been recorded in history, as far as I could find, as kings are Elizabeth I and Catherine the Great, who are arguably the most popular, well-known ones on this list. They were the ones I had the least trouble finding information for, which may be important to keep in the back of your mind. So through my research, I found some basic similarities that link all of these female rulers, for better or for worse, in ways that allowed them to come to the throne and that allowed them to be remembered as king, or maybe not being remembered as king. So the first of these is that different cultures have different views of gender throughout space and time. Not every culture has the same exact views of gender. In fact, in a lot of ancient and some medieval cultures, gender was a lot more fluid and allowed for people to move across the gender binary while still maintaining the idea of man and woman. For example, in ancient Egypt, the pharaohs were manifestations of the gods, and the gods in ancient Egypt, some of them were intersex and some of them were gender fluid. So if the pharaoh was a god on earth, then they therefore could assimilate to those gods and change their gender. And a woman also held different and important roles in society. For example, Kubaba was a tavern keeper, and in Sumerian culture, tavern keepers were very important and a very important symbol in their culture, since taverns are where great stories happen, and places for people to heal and socialize. And while we do not know how she came to the throne, we can assume that she had a higher standing than most women in society and therefore could have had access to the throne. Next is clothing. Clothing was very important to a lot of these female rulers, as a lot of them wore female or male garb to present themselves as male. For example, Hatshepsut here on the right wore the false beard of the pharaoh, which all the pharaohs before and after her did. So doing so let her people know that she was not just the queen, she was in fact the king. Then here on the left is Christina of Sweden, who is an interesting example of a female king because she was king of Sweden, and she was in documentation and all the legal paperwork, she was a king. However, she still wore female clothes, but she chose to wear bold, darker clothing, which was similar to male fashion at the time, and during her coronation, she decided to use her father's crown instead of her mother's to once again cement the idea that she was legitimate king. But in day-to-day speech, people still referred to her as a queen, and that's probably because during her time, Sweden was very Protestant, and in Protestant society, they did not allow for people to move in between the genders, which leads me to my next point, which is religion. And religion gives cultural backbones to society and culture. That gives the doctrines of who should be doing what. For example, like I said before, for Hatshepsut, the gods and goddesses of Egypt let her have those backbones to gender that let her claim the throne. But however, this didn't always help the case for these women, because a lot of the times these women went against the religion and therefore were written off as wicked and forgotten by history, such as Wu Zetian of China, who lived in Confucius China, where the concept of yin and yang was very important and very prominent in culture. The white yang represented male, while the yin represented female, and so she therefore could not occupy a male space while having this female energy, and therefore she was written off in history as wicked. And in fact, a lot of work surrounding her is banned in China to this day. And the same thing goes for European queens such as Elizabeth I and Catherine the Great. They were never king, they were only queen because of their religion. Also, different religious figures helped these females come into power as well. Tamar the Great of Georgia, she was Catholic, or Georgian Catholic, and a lot of other female rulers at the time were never recorded as king, but she was because of her society and the religious figures backing her right to the throne. So lastly is history in general. We all know that history can be kind and can also be cruel depending on the situation. And one of the ways that these female kings were remembered or lost in history was language. For example, in the Georgian language, there's no gender pronouns really, but there is a word for king and a word for like a queen consort or a queen regent. And Tamar the Great was recorded in history as a king. In histories and documents, they use the word king to describe her, which causes a lot of controversy with modern day scholars saying that she really wasn't a king because of the language. And king names were the ways that all kings used to describe themselves, and they came up with these names. But a lot of these female kings, like Hatshepsut, Wu Zetian, and Razia, they all had king names that both had masculine and feminine aspects that, again, cemented the idea that they were trying to present as male to their people. And again, like I said, history isn't always kind. Court historians who were in charge of history, if they didn't like you, then they were going to say bad things about you. And this is exactly what happened to Zetian of China and Dodi Akabi. They are both considered wicked in their own cultures, and because of stories being passed down, this idea of a female in power has really cemented in their societies, and they're usually seen as bad omens or curses. So what is the difference between a female king or a queen regent, if there really is any? Because the important thing is here, they were all female rulers who were powerful, They changed their countries, and they defied the gender roles that we see in our society. And I think it's interesting to note that, again, Elizabeth I and Catherine the Great were also rulers in their own right, but they were never remembered as kings. And I theorize this is because we as a society don't want to remember these people who deviated. We don't want to remember these people who stepped outside what we perceive as normal. And same thing goes with modern historians or using the wrong titles. For example, Hatshepsut is a pretty popular historical figure, but she's always referred to as a queen. Same with Razia of India, who on coins from her time describes her as the sultan and the king, but a lot of literature today calls her a queen or a sultana. And again, a lot of these women were received as bad omens or wicked rulers because they deviated from society. So, in conclusion, it's important that we start researching and learning about those who deviate from our society and associating kings with being king with being female, not just male, and associating even queens as being powerful, just as we perceive male kings. And it's no mystery that our views of gender are very strict, and we do know that gender is more fluid than our society allows it to be. And looking at older models of gender can help us progress our own views of gender. And so a special thank you to Dr. Landau, who helped with a lot of the IRB processes and research in general, to my fellow anthropology majors and minors who helped peer review, and to my friends and family who inspire me and encourage me to keep doing what I love to do. Thank you.